In 1825, English naturalist and zoologist Charles Waterton returned from Guyana. His journey and the subsequent studies he made were extensive. He wrote a book, Wanderings in South America, which described plenty of different wildlife and nature he encountered, such as flora, fauna, and the observations of the region itself. You can find this book available online if you're interested, and it has quite colourful descriptions of not only the location, but also the animals, the people, and the nature. Guyana is, of course, a very beautiful country. But the most interesting find of Charles Waterton's wasn't something you'd find in history books of the day. It was this. He called it the Nondescript, a strange, almost human-like animal that Waterton claimed he had killed. He described it as a large animal, too large to bring back by himself, hence why the head and shoulders, not the shampoo, were the only parts of the nondescript he brought back. It's also interesting to note that in 1825, this was a good many years before the gorilla was scientifically described. So thinking from the point of view of an early 19th century zoologist, they didn't even have the gorilla to compare this animal to. But before we go on too much about the nondescript, let's talk a bit about Charles Waterton. Charles Waterton was born in 1782 into a Catholic family. The Watertons had always been Catholic. Even during the English Reformation and the dissolution of the monasteries, they still remained Catholic, which led to the vast majority of their estates and houses being confiscated. Charles Waterton was a very devout Catholic like the rest of his family, and had strong ties to the Vatican, visiting there at least once on pilgrimage. He attended Mass weekly and donated some of his money and profits to churches and other religious buildings linked to Catholicism. He attended Stonyhurst College in Lancaster, where his interest in exploration and wildlife grew. He was quite a colourful figure at the college. One time he was caught by a teacher scaling one of the big towers to get a better look at the surrounding wildlife. He noted the foxes, badgers and other birds surrounding the place, sketched them and described them. He first travelled to South America, to Guyana specifically, in 1804. Unfortunately, the reason for this was to take charge of his uncle's plantation, which was worked on by enslaved people. Although later in life Charles Waterton did change his mind about slavery and oppose it. Waterton was a very skilled taxidermist and preserved many of the animals he encountered on his expeditions. At the time he invented a sort of unique method of taxidermy, where he would soak his specimens in mercury to preserve them. Unlike many stuffed animals, his specimens were hollow and lifelike. Charles Waterton had a bit of a sense of humour as well, and this could come across quite often as very mocking. He would frequently dress up his taxidermied figures, some of them reptiles for example, as Protestant figures of the past, to make fun of them. Charles Waterton also taught the former enslaved person John Edmonstone about taxidermy. John Edmonstone himself was a very skilled taxidermist and possibly encountered and taught a young Charles Darwin. Edmonstone was definitely one of the first black Scottish people to lecture in universities, and also made it onto the famous list of the 100 Great Black Britons from the past, which you can find online if you Google it. Anyway, back to Charles Waterton and the nondescript. Here is a drawing possibly done by Waterton of the nondescript in his 1825 book, Wanderings in South America. You can see it's drawn with quite human features and an almost intelligence about it. In the book he describes the discovery of the nondescript as followed. I also procured an animal which has caused not a little speculation and astonishment. In my opinion, his thick coat of hair and great length of tail put his species out of all question. But then his face and head caused the inspector to pause for a moment before he ventures to pronounce the opinion of the classification. He was a large animal, and as I was pressed for daylight and moreover felt no inclination to have the whole weight of his body upon my back, I contented myself with his head and shoulders, which I cut off, and have brought them with me to Europe. The nondescript's face was so human-like it even caused a rumour that it was actually a native man from South America who Waterton had killed. Waterton, being a bit of a joker as he was, didn't really do much to dispel these myths. He really did seem to enjoy not just the attention he was getting, but also the uproar of the scientific community at his discovery. But what actually was the nondescript? As a European in the early 1800s, it must have been very easy to imagine all the new and fantastic creatures that only existed in faraway lands or in paintings and books. You could imagine Waterton climbing through the jungles of South America and coming face to face with much more than what we see here. So, what was the nondescript? Is it a new species of monkey? Is it a well-known species that wasn't known in 1825? Or something else? Actually, it was something else. It wasn't even a real animal. Waterton was very annoyed at a new high import tax law that had come in. When importing goods, 20% of their value had to be paid as a tax, which Waterton strongly protested, not only citing his Catholic faith, but also citing his specimens he's brought in. The Treasury wouldn't even allow Waterton to bring his specimens into the country until he paid the tax. And it's been suggested that the Secretary to the Treasurer at the time, a man called Stephen Rumbold Lushenden, looked an awful lot like the nondescript when you put them side by side. The nondescript was made by using the rear end of a howler monkey and chemicals used to loosen the skin up for Waterton to then shape it how he liked. He then used a corrosive sublime that allowed him to mould a human face onto the rear end of the monkey. This shows us a side of Charles Waterton that was rather eccentric. The nondescript has also been suggested to be an attack on the seriousness of many naturalists. Waterton's work was often quite tongue-in-cheek, and he liked the more fun aspect of travelling and exploring, rather than what he thought was the more boring side of zoology, reading through old books and looking at drawings. In part, the creation of the nondescript is Waterton's desire to create an animal that's so unusual that zoologists have to study it and also enjoy finding out that it's a hoax. Frustratingly for Waterton, not everyone appreciated this satire, and he was frequently attacked afterwards. His credibility was questioned as a zoologist from then onwards, and people could attack his much more serious works by just citing the nondescript. Sadly, whilst the nondescript is not a new animal or a cryptid in the normal sense, it still must have been very interesting for those people who first heard about it when it was brought back to England. Once again, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, and I hope to see you all in the next video, and the Egyptian cryptid video is coming out soon, I promise. I'm not delaying it on purpose. Bye.